Alright, so this is lesson 68, and we are naming decimal numbers. In this lesson, we will name decimal numbers that have 1, 2, or 3 decimal places. So we've already learned that the first decimal place after the decimal point is the tenths, then the hundredths, and now we're moving on to the thousandths. So 10 of these thousandths makes a hundredth. And we don't actually, use a thousandth when we're talking with money, but it does have a name, and its name is a mil. But to name decimal numbers that have digits on both sides of the decimal point, we have to break the number into 2 different parts. So, for this part, we have this number right here, 12 5/10, and when we write it and say it, we have to mentally break it into 2 different parts. So I break it into my whole number part first, so I write 12. When I see my decimal point, I say and then I write down what my decimal number is after the decimal point, which is a 5. And then I know that this is a tenth because it's only one spot after the decimal point. So I would read it and say 12 5/10. Go ahead and try and write the second one. And say it to yourself and see if you kind of get the same thing that I do. Alright, so we're going to do it the same way that we did before. So we have to break it up into two different parts. So I have my whole number, which is my 6. And then I would say and then I read the whole number, 12, and then this is not a tenth, it's a hundredth now. So I would say 6, my decimal point, and then I read the number 12 hundredths, because it's not the first, but it's the second that I'm reading, the second spot after the decimal point. Alright, use words to name the decimal number, and I'm gonna read it like 12.25. So use words to give this a name, and you're gonna write it down under here. So see if you can do that yourself. Break it up into 2 parts. You have your whole number, and then you have your decimal number after. Alright, so I would break it into 2 parts here. So I have my 12, my decimal point, and my 25. So I kind of group them together. So I'm going to do my whole number first, which is 12. Then I'm going to write down and then I'm going to name my decimal point, or the number after the decimal. I name it as a whole, 25, and then it's not a tenth, but a hundredth. So I'm going to write 12 and 25 hundredths. 25 hundredths. Sorry, I don't have enough room. But 12 and 25 hundredths. Alright, go ahead and try example number 2. It says, use digits to write the decimal number 10 and 12 hundredths. So now we're taking our decimal, or our number, and it's written out here, and it wants you to turn it into digits. Go ahead and try it yourself and see if you get the same thing that I do. Alright, so I break it down, and I have 10, my decimal, that's an and 20 and 12 hundredths. So I would write my first part, my whole number, 10. My decimal point is my and then it is 12 hundredths. So I wrote down my 1, 2, 12, and I can go up and check in my chart. Up here you have a chart that tells you tenths and hundredths if you forget. But know that you have your decimal point, then comes a tenth, then comes a hundredth, and lastly a thousandth. Alright, and the last one for example number 3. So it says, the door was, and I'm going to read it like this, 2.032 meters tall. Though that's not the right way to write it down, I want you to try and see if you can read it yourself. Write the height as a mixed number. Now, we practiced this today in class. I gave you a list of numbers that looked like this, a whole number with a decimal, and you had to turn it into a fraction. Now, most of our numbers had either 1 or 2 decimal numbers behind the decimal point, and this time it's out of 3. So what do you think we're going to do different than what we did before? Well, if we had one number, let's say it was 1.1, we had one number after the decimal point, we turn this into 1 and 1 over 10, because it's a tenth. That's 1/10. If I had 3 and 12 hundredths, I took 3 as my whole number, and then 12 hundredths over 100. So now if I have this 32 thousandths, it would look like this. 2 and 32 thousandths, break it up into two different parts, your whole number and your decimal point. I would then make my mixed number. I have 2 wholes, and if I read this tenths, hundredths, thousandths, I have 32, but instead of over 10, over 100, it's now over 1,000. So 2 and 32 thousandths. Alright, in your lesson practice, it says, use words to name each decimal number. So I'm going to read it like this, just so you have to write it in the real words. A is 24.42, B is 0.125, C is 10.075, D is 12.61, and E is 9.32. Remember, as you name these, break them into 2 different parts. You say the whole number first, and for where the decimal point is, and then name your decimal. Alright, and have a good night.